We normally like to begin with something positive. Unfortunately, I have to begin updating you on the situation with our planned trip to Turkey with the news that is just like fingernails on a blackboard to me. Maybe tomorrow is the word we heard this morning. We met all the conditions. Our lawyer's still there in Ankara, and he did everything they asked him to do, and did more. They said, come back tomorrow. Maybe there'll be good news tomorrow, but I've been saying that for quite a while. It's hard to be patient. We got through the introduction, or at least the beginning part of the presentation on the Ark last Wednesday evening, where we showed that this is central to the teaching of the Bible. No way to separate that from faith in Christ, who believed in Noah and the Ark, and the idea of trying to relegate the stories of the Old Testament to myth while believing the New Testament is completely untenable. We showed the credibility, the feasibility of the story that we find in Scripture, and we had just begun to climb the mountain, and we'll get back to that point in just a moment. But before we take up with that point, I want to deal with some things that I have heard several ask about, and I know on the minds of some. That is some of the wild stories that you hear. Maybe that's not the way to describe it, but some of them sound very credible. Hasn't it already been found? And yours, those who have found the Ark, and Ron Wyatt is one of them. I'm sorry, Mr. Ron Wyatt, while maybe very convincing, has put out videos that have persuaded a lot of people. Would make a fortune as a used car salesman. He is a con man extraordinaire. He is deceased at this point, but many of his devotees are continuing. He advocated the site that we're looking at here on the screen, which doesn't look a whole lot like an ark, but this was his picture. When you look at it from this angle, it's a little bit more ship-like. And this is there in Turkey, and it's not that far, but it's not on Mount Ararat. It's about 18 kilometers from Mount Ararat. And here we see the sign that says, in Turkish, Noah's ship, 5 miles, and we're a pretty good ways from the mountain at that point. It's about 18 kilometers, the site that he's referring to. Looking from the air, you can definitely see that boat-like shape. But then you see a lot of other things as well. There's a boat-like rim of the same kind of material on the outside that is not a part of the ship, according to him. Looking at this angle, I think I got a little better picture of it than he had. And the shading will show you the area that is ship-like. And he's claimed that he found rivets and he found petrified wood. He's not telling the truth. What he found were iron nodules, which is not that unusual, and there is no petrified wood. But looking at the area there on the side, you see this rim going around it, which is exactly the same material. That's not consistent with his interpretation of the Ark. And up on the mountain behind it, on the ridge, you see exactly the same material. It's a feldspar deposit, as a result of volcanism. When you get up further away, you can see those lines running in all directions, all over the place, especially from the wide angle view that you can see here. And I think you can see what he's calling the ship running in all directions, all over the place. Looking carefully at the sides of what he says is the ship, it doesn't look a lot like wood, does it? But it's eroded and it's petrified or whatever. Well, it's feldspar on the outside, and we wanted to see what was on the inside. And when nobody was around, we got some dynamite and put a hole in the side of it so we could see what was inside. And it's feldspar all the way. It's nothing but what you could see on the outside. It's interesting to look at it from the sky. This is a satellite picture looking down, and as you can see that boat-like shape in the center. But you also see the flow around it of the volcanic material. And looking at this Air Force picture, perhaps you can see here that picture down toward the bottom. There is the shape, but then you see another one over here, and then another one over there, and then another one up here. And I think you can find others there, but at least four are pretty clear. So that would raise the question, did Noah have a fleet of arks? And maybe Noah was an admiral with a fleet. I think this is just as bogus as it can be, though it is very persuasive to some people. One that has begun less sophisticated, but has gotten more sophisticated through the years, is this fellow who is a tour guide there from the Leviathan there at the base of the mountain. And he has manufactured a movie set up on the mountain, made videos, and sold well over 1 million of the videos, a lot of them in China, Australia, around the world. Looking here from Dogobazit back at the mountain, you get a view that allows you to see the glacier where he says this ark is, and it's at about 14,000 feet. The mountain is 17, but that's where he says it is. It's a pretty steep grade, and if you know anything about glaciers, if they're at an angle, and most of them are, they move. And they move much like a tractor tread. And they pick up and grind up everything they pick up along the way. So they're usually full of rocks, debris that they have picked up along their path. And that's what's going on here at this steep grade. Now, the path that we traversed going up the mountain is seen here with the little yellow dots. One of the base camps at 10.5, and then at 14,000 feet is the major base camp, what's called the Federation campsite. And this is called the Federation route. That's the one the government allows you to travel up. And so you can look where it's not. But we use that to get up and over the top to go then another mile down the other side to get to the site we were investigating. But Red Canyon is easily seen from the 14,000 foot site, from the Federation campsite. And this picture was taken from that site. This is my tent here looking down at what is called Red Canyon. And the glacier is there. And it's in that glacier that he says he's found the ark. And here's the picture that he has to prove that. And that's pretty convincing. Wow, look at that. However, just a little examination sees that he just plastered that up. We did it in the summertime and then put water on it. Brings back in the wintertime to see it, a few. This is Panda Lee, one who was convinced by looking at this. But he used a number of other people to build this movie set. We talked to one who finally was just disgusted by how it was being misused and interviewed him. We have the tape. And from the video transcript, the Kurdish worker, we have this conversation question. Are you still working with Kurdish? That's the fellow who was in charge of this, making the movie set. The worker, yes, I started again work. This project will continue for many years. The parachute doesn't know about this. It was about the interview. He was in serious trouble. They work on this project for 4 years. The building started 2 years ago. Question from where did they get the wood? The worker answered, I heard them say they bring from Black Sea. It was an old ship that they found, so they got pieces of wood from there. Did you know what you were building? Worker answered, no, I didn't know. I think it is only for a movie. But when I see the news on TV that time, I understand all things. That is the interview where he was claiming that he found it. And he thought he was building a movie set. Well, we look at the glacier where it's supposed to be, and this is moving downhill pretty rapidly, which is what glaciers do. You see the rocks that it's full of, the little black rocks that it's sampled as that glacier moves. Wikipedia describes the movement of a glacier this way. It can be fast, up to 30 meters a day, but typically around 25 centimeters a day. So that's more or less the average. That equals about 300 feet a year. That is at the average rate, or about a quarter of a mile in 4.4 years, or 180 miles since 1840, the earthquake that opened the gash, and they say marked the time when it was revealed. Well, it's moved 180 miles at the average rate, and certainly wouldn't be at that same spot on the glacier. The glacier goes down the mountain as glaciers do. We climbed up to that site. We had climbed the mountain earlier, and this was about a week later. We climbed back up to 14,000 feet. And here you can see the fallen debris. You can see the pretty good sized crevasse in the background there, another one here, and then some smaller ones in the foreground. But down in the large crevasse is where he says he found this picture, or this, the remains of the ark. We got there in the middle of the summer, or the last part of the summer. There was a great deal of meltback. He had built this to be viewed in the winter. And part of the wood had come apart and floating there in the bottom. And you can see part of his built set there in the background. We look again at that picture that he says is the ark in another film put out by NAMPI, which is the Chinese sponsoring organization. We see a little bit more of the context, but it's wood built into the side of the glacier. The little knob that you see here can be seen in this wider view, and then a still wider view. The fellow who says he's found it, one of their dupes who perhaps did believe, but we can see the context here. It's what's in the bottom of the glacier. I got there in the summer when the water level was higher in the bottom, and part of it had come apart. They have to rebuild it each year. Now, if we superimpose Nambi's picture on it, that's without the water. Here it is with the water level. But that's what had come apart and was floating. We collected some of that wood And it's light, it's fresh. They blackened it, charred it to make it look old. And that's what is in the glacier that they have built. The workers described the bag of crushed burned wood they used to blacken it, as well as holding it over the fire. I sawed that piece with a handsaw, and you can see the end of it. It's fresh wood, like something that came from Lowe's. Very crude fraud that was easily exposed. The idea that that's from Noah's Ark is laughable. He's, in subsequent years, gotten a little more sophisticated in his deceitful efforts, and his latest pictures show this that he found, and planted it up there in the summer, and let the winter cover it over with ice. And that's pretty maybe convincing to a lot of people. Maybe that's the crude wood that Noah used, until you look at some of the ox carts in the area around Geology, and you see that that is the technology that is used today around Geology. It's easily recognizable by somebody who's familiar with implements that they use to plow with, and with the ox carts. He's put that up there and claimed, here's the ark, and sold over 1 million videos, $19.95 a piece. It is an obvious fraud. The fact that it's in a moving glacier, which certainly wouldn't be there for 1,000 years, or even the time since 1840, this is an obvious fraud. Reported in WorldNet Daily as just wood planted on Ararat, and I think very accurately. So those are the two primary claims that some had asked about, and so we decided it might be good to just go ahead and show that to you. Now let's go back to where we were. We were beginning to climb up the mountain. The base camp, 1,400, is below me at the bottom of that arrow. And you can see the path. Not a very nice path. Those rocks are certainly not articulated, that is, in place. They roll and tumble, and sometimes when you step on it, it's like a log in the water. I stepped on one which just did roll and turned me upside down. I landed with my head on one of the glacial edges, and so had to go back down and have my head sewed up. In a hospital that had way more flies than people, I did get a very professional head bandage out of it, as you can see, and then back up the mountain. The first base camp is 23, which is really not in that picture. The next one is 10.5, which is a pretty good ways up if you're in the United States. 1,400 is as high as any of the mountains are in the contiguous U.S. Going on up to 17 is quite a trek. Once you get up on the glacier, you don't have tumbling rocks, but you do have other problems. You have crevasses that open up, sometimes completely hidden. Looking at the diagram here, they usually have a pool of ice water at the bottom, and that's just pretty certain death if you go down into the glacier. It looks safe at the top often. This is an example of that. You can see the glaciers in the background, but in the foreground, this one was invisible. And the hole that you see with the footprints leading to it is where our lead climber went, alpinist. We were roped together, fortunately, and he went right down through that hole. pull him back out. This is the hole that he went through. He did have enough presence of mind as he was dangling down on that rope to take some pictures. Back that up, which is what the inside of the glacier looks like. Caught him, of course, before he got all the way to the bottom. This is a little bit of a taste idea of what's going on, and it is extremely dangerous. Tom Russell is standing here in the picture with me, who's a preacher I preached with in Dallas for 4 years. Very faithful gospel preacher, and was a Marine, and if you're in a fight, that's somebody you'd want to have with you. He teaches firearm safety. And anyway, we were stranded right here where the star is, and the picture is, you see in the right-hand corner down at the bottom, that's the summit, just actually a little bit above where that word is. So we're well over 1,600 feet, about 16.6 on this plain, windswept plain, and we were traveling over or near top and around to get to the site we were interested in, and a big storm came up, and we were caught in a whiteout there in the middle of that plain. The people who were carrying our goods, the Sherpas, saw the storm coming, and they dumped our stuff and took off. They got to camp just as the storm arrived, and we were there. So we spent the night in the whiteout where you can't see your hand in front of your face, in sub-zero temperature with 80 to 90 mile an hour winds that night, which should have been lethal. About 11 o'clock that night, I did see what I thought were rocks that we could get behind to provide some protection from the wind. They were actually the duffel bags that had been dropped. One of them was full of some hand warmers, foot warmers, chemical that most of you have seen. So we stuffed our shirts and our pants with that and survived. Without that find, we would not have. We did continue, and this is the summit at about 17,000. That was not the goal, but it's kind of neat to be there and get over the top. About another mile and a half to what's known as the Ed Davis site, which is, of course, full of ice at this point. We talked about what Ed Davis saw last Wednesday evening. You might want to review to have a little more information there. According to the satellite information we had, which was somewhat flawed, spoofing is a regular part of the warfare between the Kurds and the Turks. This is in a war zone. The spoofing will confuse the GPA and will move where you think you are. Not dramatically, but 75 yards will make a big difference trying to go down through the ice. The first night we enjoyed 80 mile per hour winds in our tents. This is, of course, very near the top. This is one of our workers. He's from Texas, and he insists on wearing his cowboy hat. This was where Randall Price was staying, his tent. You see the tip of it there. Actually, that's an advantage once it gets covered with the ice. The next night it got rough. Over 100 miles, well, at least the wind gauge broke at 100 miles per hour. And it ripped up many of the tents. This was one of the Kurdish workers' tents, and this was the tent of Big Bright, whom we introduced last Wednesday evening. Climbed the mountain 36 times, and should be going with us this time. He was almost frozen. We rescued him semi-conscious about 3 o'clock in the morning. One of the Kurdish workers came to me and unzipped my tent, stuck his head in, and of course I couldn't understand what he was saying. Finally, he said, "Dick." So I got the message he was in trouble, and we pulled him out of his collapsed tent and into mine and put him in another bag, sleeping bag. He was not in good shape. Somebody told me that I should have climbed in the bag with him to help warm it up. And I said, no, you just have to die. I'm not going to go there. We got to the area and we're using some very sophisticated equipment, side scanning radar, to drag the radar detection material across the area in the grid to help confirm what we were seeing with the satellite. And that battery that you see there didn't come up there by itself. It had to be carried, obviously, along with the other equipment. Dr. Bryant has PhD from Texas A&M. He is licensed as a geologist, as an engineer, as a cartologist. There's another license that I can't remember, but he's a very sophisticated scientist that was working with us, interpreting the signals from the side scanning radar. GPS signals were scrambled. The first readings that ought to be out here in the middle of the valley, out way ahead of where you see the fellow with the detection standing. That's obviously wrong from the spoofing. The large dig tent was over the site that we ultimately determined was the proper place to dig, which wasn't, but close. That allowed us to continue digging around the clock. The apparatus that I had designed and had built that you take apart and put back together once you get there forms truss. You suspend the winch, the apparatus to pull the ice up. And we used chainsaws then to cut the ice into blocks. And we made an 8 by 8 foot hole that we sunk down in the ice, 34 feet. You see the blocks of ice that had been removed. And this is Dick right here. This is Dr. Randall Price, it's myself. And we're in the process of pulling those blocks out. And this is what it looked like as we were going down. From the down, looking back up, looks like this. And we did do a video just so you could get some kind of an idea of how this process worked. All right. Come on, guys. The pipes on the side are for ventilation. You have chainsaws down at the bottom of the hole. You got fuse. You need fresh air. The bottom line was we got to the bottom, 34 feet down, and we found nothing. The spoofing had caused us to be off by about 20 meters. And after that much effort, you can imagine the disappointment. We did use augers then, together with information from the Turkish satellite, which was not geosynchronous. It came across each day. Ours stayed still, but coming across each day gave different angles, did a better job actually of locating, and said we were 20 meters off. And the auger hit debris at the 34-foot level, which we had expected was it would. Well, at that point, I took that debris down to the hospital there in Dogobazik, in the laboratory, and you like to see what I saw? I think that's obviously wood. Now, the glacier that we showed you before was full of rocks. This glacier is like an ice cube, which means it's in a bowl. That glacier is not moving at all, which is indicated by the fact that you don't have rocks in it. It's a stationary glacier, and that's why it could contain an ark. So we gave instructions to go back and do more drilling at that site, and we were very much at the end of the season at that point. But they brought this down. I gave instructions to put the debris in oil, keep it protected. I don't know whether they didn't understand or didn't know the importance, but they just shoved the ice with the debris in a fruit jar. And when they came down, it was floating in muddy water, which is a recipe for contamination. You want to do dating, but here are the pieces. And if you want to look at them up close and personal in our museum, we do have those pieces on display. I think I know what we're looking at.
What made you decide to dig at that location? What gave you the indication?
The combination of side scanning radar, grid, and the satellite telemetry. And relying on that satellite telemetry is what got us 20 feet off, 20 meters off. The Turkish satellite information was more accurate. There is more significant information, but we're broadcasting on the internet, and I'm not going to tell you all the details. But at this point, we learned, I'll just say it like that, we learned of a 100-foot section of the ark that had broken. We knew it had broken into at least 2 pieces from the satellite telemetry. What we were seeing as a result of the spoofing was similar to what you have with a mirage. What you're seeing is real, but it's just not where you think it is. It's over here instead of there, but we could see the broken pieces, and Dr. Bryant had interpreted that for us, which is conclusion. But we found that there was a 100-foot section that had broken off and slid down the mountain and was about 1,000 feet lower, was below the glacier area, and was exposed, not covered with snow during the winter, but in the summer the snow melts back and it's exposed in an area that is not obvious. And one of the difficulties in seeing it involves a very typical delusion that we have as we think about the ark. When you've seen pictures of the ark, how many of you have seen a picture of a black ark? Nobody. What color is pitch? Why don't we draw it black? It is black, and the rock is black. And anyway, it's very well camouflaged. We think we know exactly where that is. The fellow that had revealed that to us, very. I don't want to give away more information, but we're confident that he knows exactly where that is and that he will be able to carry us to it and has agreed to do so. That's what will happen. We won't have to hunt for it and we won't have to dig. We just go to it. Did see pictures, but that's as far as I'm going to go. Let's conclude by thinking about some of the implications. If we have a vessel that was initially almost 2 football fields long, that's 3.5 miles up. There's no way to get it there except floating. can't have a 3.5 mile high local flood, can you? That just will not fly. You don't have to be a physicist to understand that. What that means is that there was proof, or is proof, of a worldwide supernatural judgment, and there's just no way around that. When we talk about geology, we talk about the fact that the earth is covered, the continents are covered, with an average of 1.5 miles of sedimentary rock. That's water, laid rock, full of dead things, fossils. Now, the evolutionists say this is the result of slow, gradual buildup over millions of years. We say no, it's a rapid, high-energy, catastrophic flood deposition. Two different interpretations, evolution or flood. If we find the ark 3.5 miles up, I think that battle is over. I think we win and they lose. Interesting to notice the comment by Tom Carroll, ABC. He said, consider, and he's not a believer, if the biblical story of creation is a fact and not a fable, then the theory of evolution is all we have. A confirmed discovery of Noah's Ark would be the greatest archaeological find of all times and would provide for religious fundamentalists hard evidence of the Bible's absolute reliability. And I think he's correct. Let's conclude being reminded of what Peter said about this. He said, there will be mockers following after their own lust, saying, where's the promise of this kind? Not going to be any judgment. He hadn't judged for years and years and years. Since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. At least they were creationists, but they didn't believe in the judgment of the flood. Peter says they deliberately ignore not the myth, but the fact that the earth was formed out of water, by means of water, through which the world at that time was deluged with water and perished. By the word of God, it was formed out of water. And by the word of God, it was deluged with water and destroyed. That's a fact. And they're ignoring that. God's not going to judge. Here is a demonstration of the fact that God will judge. Population dynamics indicate there were billions of people. And God did judge, unless there were few, 8 souls that were saved. Any who would humbly submit to God's word, but too many were proud. Jesus himself referred to it this way: they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. That, of course, brings it home for us. They were eating and drinking and having a good time. And judgment came. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Proof of God's judgment in the flood, Peter says, is proof that God will ultimately judge. He says, the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, the earth and its works will be burned up. That's a fact. And this will provide confirmation, I believe. That's the way Peter used the flood. It's not just a picture of judgment. We need to look at the other side of that coin as well. Hebrews 11:7 says, by faith, Noah, being warned by God about, and notice how it's all the way through the New Testament. Being warned by God, Noah, about things not seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. God provided for salvation, and that's a picture of what we see in the flood as well. It refers to the long suffering of God, patiently waiting for all to be saved. Those who rebelled weren't. In the days of Noah, when the ark was preparing, were there few, that is, 8 souls were saved. We continue saying this is a picture of baptism. which now saves you. Now, when you read that, certainly you have to be impressed with the fact that you better pay attention. The fact you don't won't change things. Those who aren't paying attention perish. Doesn't matter how many agree or how many disagree. That day is coming. It's real. And we need to prepare. Thank you for listening this evening. We will solicit your prayers, and we may have good news tomorrow. We may get more delays like we've had over and over. But we would appreciate your prayers in that behalf. Conclude with the word of prayer. Let's bow our heads. We're thankful, Father, for your love and mercy, and for the revelation of your will and of the truths that sustain our faith, that give us reasons for our hope. We pray that you would bless us in our efforts for good and our efforts to show the world the reality of your word and of the spiritual truths that it reveals. We pray for your continued blessings in Christ's name.